Hope you enjoyed the behind the scenes look at how deep dives are made. Thanks so much for watching.
Atticus, you didn't do a deep dive.
Oh, I haven't done it yet?
No, you haven't done it yet.
That's not what they came for?
No, they actually came for a deep dive.
Oh, I actually need to... Okay.
Yep, there you go.
Hang on. What is up, guys? So today we are back with another deep dive, diving a little bit deeper into the Rainbow Cup, and today we're actually going over the second most requested Pokemon that I have honestly seen in the last few days. This has been an insane amount of votes for Quagsire today, and with a good reason, because Quagsire has a pretty interesting toolkit. And I tried to look at some pieces of this toolkit and try to at least figure out why Quagsire is going to be so good in the Rainbow Cup. So let's get started with that. Quagsire is actually a water and ground type Pokemon, maxing out at level 40 with 15s across the board at 1992. I gotta say, that's a pretty good year. With a 0-1 attack, 15 defense, and 14 stamina, at level 29 you can hit a 1499, keeping you under that 1500 mark, while actually keeping a really good stat product for your Quagsire here. Now, according to my spreadsheets and all the numbers that I have ran, Quagsire should rank around 12th in bulk and 10th in stat product. And of course that comes from his base stats here, which are so good. So 152 on attack, 143 on defense. Being that those numbers are so close together, it's not too shabby, but his stamina at 216 is huge. That is a great stat product. It's not the perfect stat product for PvP, but definitely a good one. Now, Quagsire actually has quite a few moves to actually choose from here, and I tried to fit them all here because they're all kind of important to talk about. First, let's go over his fast moves. So Water Gun and Mud Shot here, both are stab candidates, being water and ground type moves. 3 energy per turn for Water Gun with 3 damage per turn, but after you factor in stab, it does bump up to 3.6. Then with Mud Shot, we do have 4.5 energy per turn. That's huge. And then only 1.5 damage per turn. After stab, it does at least get to 1.8, but still that's very, very low on the damage. But you're not really running Mud Shot to actually have a lot of damage. You're really running Mud Shot to get to these charge moves faster. So straight away, let's actually take a look at Water Gun and Mud Shot. When deciding between the two, I really think it depends on which version of Quagsire you're really going after. Because you do have Water Gun, while it's very like middle of the road, very decent energy with decent damage, while Mud Shot is very fast with little damage. You kind of have to pick and choose what you're actually going for. So I did come up with 2 different move sets utilizing both moves to try to figure out which one I like better. And honestly, it makes it really difficult. But let's actually get into our charge moves to figure out what those are. So Sludge Bomb here, not a stab move, being that it's poison. Acid Spray does share the same typing, so neither of those are actually going to be stab moves. Earthquake is a ground type move, and Stone Edge is a rock type move, so Earthquake ends up being our only stab candidate here. Sludge Bomb actually costing 50 energy to fire for 80 damage at a 1.60 damage per energy ratio. Earthquake, we've always talked about Earthquake, 65 energy for 120 at a 1.85 damage per energy ratio, but after stab it does bump up to 144 on the damage for a 2.21 damage per energy ratio. That's pretty huge. Stone Edge here, 55 to fire for 100 damage at a 1.82, so not too shabby. And then Acid Spray, which we've talked about, 50 energy for 20 damage at only a 0.4 damage per energy ratio. But of course, you do get the added benefit that Acid Spray does lower the defense stat 1 whole stage every time you fire it. Whether they shield it or not, that's pretty big. So, out of these charge moves, there's a lot of different builds for Quagsire, and I think that's what gives Quagsire such a big role in this cup, is that he can actually be utilized in a lot of different ways, which makes him really interesting. So the 2 ways that I actually built out our Quagsire today is Water Gun, Earthquake, and Stone Edge. And the reason that I actually chose that particular moveset is because this back against the wall shield scenario is super high at 70%. That was the highest moveset that I could find that got this particular shield situation up that high. And then I also have Mud Shot, Acid Spray, and Stone Edge. Yeah, so here's the reason for that. So with Mudshot, you're gaining tons of energy super fast. With Acid Spray, you've got a super low cost move, and you're downing the shields so that this Mudshot actually may be able to do something. And then on top of that, you have Stone Edge, which actually has really good damage payoff in a lot of scenarios. Plus, I think Stone Edge works a lot for the fire type matchups, any flying types that are out there, and it just kind of helps with a lot of neutral damage even outside of that. It's not resisted very much in the meta, which I think is very important. So I do have both movesets listed here with our shield situations to try to compare the two, I guess. So in a 0 versus 0, or when I don't have any shields, neither does my opponent, and it's kind of like that mock-up closing type situation, Water Gun and Earthquake actually end up winning 70.7% of those matchups. That's pretty freaking clean. Now when we switch over to Mudshot and Acid Spray, we actually go down to 58.7. Yeah, I was kind of like, oh, this moveset's gonna be trash, like why is it so bad? But just wait. So in our 2 versus 0, where I have 2 shields and my opponent doesn't have any shields, we actually end up winning 88% with Water Gun and Earthquake. Not too bad. With this shield situation, I'm actually trying to figure out not the actual wins that we have. We don't really care about these 88%. We actually care about the other side, the ones that we actually lose up against. Because if I have complete shield advantage, I want to know which Pokemon still end up beating me. So, out of that, we actually end up losing to, drumroll please, grass. It's grass. There's no need for a drumroll. Yeah, grass types end up just having a huge advantage over our Quagsire here, considering that we do carry a huge weakness to the grass type moves. So, that kind of makes a lot of sense. We end up losing to a lot of those, and we don't really have a good chance at beating them. All of our matchups are pretty horrible up against the grass types. Then when we move over to Mudshot and Acid Spray here, we only go down by a roughly like 3.2%, so not too bad. 84.8 is not too shabby, but there again, it's mainly the grass types that we end up losing against with a couple of variations in between. Next, we move on to our 0 versus 2 shield situation. So whenever I don't have any shields, but my opponent actually has 2 shields, I actually want to figure out which Pokemon I can end up beating. So that makes this 16.3% very important. Now, with Water Gun and Earthquake, you'd not be surprised. Mainly the fire types are what's going to fall to us here, so that makes a lot of sense. We are pretty much a hard counter to the fire types at that point. Now, in our Mudshot and Acid Spray, we actually go all the way down to 7.6, which it's always disheartening to see a single-digit number here. But 7.6 actually has a pretty interesting set of Pokemon. We do win against couple of the fires, not a lot of them, and we actually do end up winning against a few of the electric types, not too many of them, but we actually do add Azumarill to this percentage here, so that's actually kind of cool, because Azumarill is going to be like that one that's everybody's like, oh, I already got Azumarill, there's no point in not using it. Well, Quagsire actually has a pretty decent setup if you're going with Acid Spray. Being able to do a little bit of super effective damage, you can kind of take out that Azumarill. Now, of course, it could be said that Sludge Bomb does the exact same thing except better, but we're not to the important piece yet. So our last shield scenario is actually this 2 versus 2, or you can kind of think of this as like a mock-up opening type situation if you want to. 40.2% with Water Gun and Earthquake. That's not too great, but it's also not too bad. So that ends up telling us that with Water Gun, Earthquake, and Stone Edge, you do kind of prefer to be a closer rather than an opener. But when we switch over to this Mudshot Acid Spray, 71.7% of the matches go to us, which is big. That's huge. So I really think that Mudshot, Stone Edge, and Acid Spray is a huge opening move. Now, it could be said that they can easily just call your bluff. They could easily just call your lead and say, oh, I'm just going to lead with Venusaur, Meganium, Ivysaur, whichever grass type Pokemon they're running. But I mean, still, that's big numbers. 71% is big, especially in a cup that has 5 different typings. That's a lot of coverage. That's tons of coverage there. So let's actually get into some matchups and try to figure out what these numbers actually mean. So just to kind of show off what we're doing here, I do have Quagsire set up on PvPoke. We have Water Gun, Earthquake, and Stone Edge, which was our first moveset that we went over in our shield scenarios. Now, I do have a custom group set up in the multi-battle settings with all of the top 10 bulkiest Pokemon from the Rainbow Cup. Now, it says that I do have 15, but that's only because I did take a couple of different Suicune movesets and try to tweak them. I did include Extra Sensory, Hidden Power Water, Snarl, Hidden Power Bug, and Ground, and Grass as our fast moves on Suicune, just to kind of give like a general idea on how good Suicune could possibly do. And then we do have the other of the top 10 bulk. So let's actually run this and see how we do. Of course, this is a 1v1 shield scenario situation. So as you can see here, we have 6 wins at 40%, 8 losses. So not too shabby. Of course, Shuckle is the easiest matchup here. That's to no one's surprise. Suicune Bug actually does pretty bad up against the Quagsire. Ground also doesn't really help. Now, Mantine actually ends up having a hard time because of our Stone Edge. That's one of those Pokemon that end up taking super effective damage to it. So we end up having a really good matchup up against the Mantine. Fortress actually ends up having a big problem with some of the neutral damage that we can throw at it. And then Suicune with water, of course, doesn't really do a whole lot of damage to us. And then we have Lapras, which is actually the only tie that we have. But remember Lapras, okay? This is going to be very interesting. Then we have the Azumarill matchup. Lantern, Tentacruel, Suicune with Extra Sensory can actually beat us, and Suicune with Snarl can actually beat us. Remember talking about that Dark type move in the Bug type video, where Dark type moves actually end up being really good because they can't be resisted by a ton of the stuff in this meta. There are going to be a lot of things that are just going to take flat out neutral damage to Dark type moves. So if you have a Pokemon with some Dark type moves, kind of be thinking that in the back of your head whenever you're building a team. Then we actually have Dugong and Jumpluff, and Suicune with Hidden Power Grass, of course, is going to be a big deal for us. All that's kind of interesting for Water Gun. So remember 6 wins, and remember that Lapras setup there. So now we're actually going to switch over to Mudshot, Acid Spray, and Stone Edge, which of course was our second shield scenario here. And we're just going to hit battle. Holy cow, 11 wins out of the top 10 bulk here. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but you know what I mean, okay? So let's actually look at these. So Shuckle again, no big deal. Tentacruel, okay. Dugong. Lapras is actually a win this time. Lantern, Mantine, Suicune with Bug, Suicune with Ground, and Suicune with Water, all no big deals. There's that Azumarill matchup that I was talking about. Fortress actually falls here, and then we start to get into the Suicune with Extra Sensory and Snarl, both end up beating us. Jumpluff, which of course makes a lot of sense, and Suicune with Hidden Power Grass actually give us another run for our money there. So, that's kind of interesting, because what you're basically doing when you use Mudshot and Acid Spray together is you're making this hyper quick defense lowering Pokemon, even if you get stuck in a really bad situation. Mudshot's gonna get you to Acid Spray in a little over 5 turns, which is pretty insane. It should be like 6 turns after like some decimal places happen, but 6 turns? Holy cow, that's fast. Plus, even if you're in an unfavorable matchup, you still get to do a lot of defense lowering and set up for the next Pokemon, or if you can kind of switch bait some people, you could actually set up a really good farming situation for our actual Quagsire here, and you can actually set up for quite a few Acid Sprays on the next Pokemon, which, holy cow, that sets you up even better. So I know PvPoke doesn't really demonstrate Acid Spray as well, but I think this is one of the situations where it kind of does start to show its glimmer here. Acid Spray could be really good in the long run if you decide to run it on your Quagsire. But if you're wanting to go the, I don't really want to say like safer route, I just want to say like if you're wanting to go a more generic route, like a more generalistic type Quagsire build rather than a specialist build, then Water Gun, Earthquake, and Stone Edge do just perfectly fine for that. But this Acid Spray could be really good in a lot of scenarios. Plus, helping you tear down the defense to Lapras, that sounds mind-boggling to me. Lapras is such a huge Pokemon that being able to tear through Lapras, with a water and ground type Pokemon by itself is just crazy. Azumarill is also another big one that I was really surprised to see, so Acid Spray may have a lot going for it. Now, like I said, with Sludge Bomb, you do get a better payoff in damage, but you don't get that defense lowering kind of mechanic there, so it's not a worse option by any means, but it definitely does take away some of the mind game. So now let's actually go over some countering situations with Quagsire. So all of this stuff is ran with Water Gun, Earthquake, and Stone Edge to try to give you an idea how good of a generalist we can actually be with Quagsire. So in terms of countering, what should we be focusing our attention on whenever we use a Quagsire versus what do we actually just need to bring to the table to beat the Quagsire? Don't let the colors fool you, because while it's only 2 versus 3 here, it's kind of like the water and the bug aren't necessarily like all in on Quagsire. They're kind of split closer to the middle. So let's actually go over those here. So again, in PV Poke, we're actually just going to build our Quagsire Water Gun, Stone Edge, Earthquake up against the entire Rainbow Cup, 1 shield versus 1 shield here. Once we hit battle, we do get this giant list of all the Pokemon. So let's actually start from the top. Fire Pokemon. I do have everyone written there with an asterisk, and that's because we do beat every single person except for Ho-Oh, if Ho-Oh has the grass type hidden power. Other than that, we should be pretty good on every fire type. If Ho-Oh happens to have hidden power grass, then yes, you could have some trouble, but I don't foresee many people actually trying to use Ho-Oh, so I wouldn't really worry too much about it. Next, let's actually look into our electrics. All but 2 is what we have written there. So in the electric type matchups, as you can see, we do actually have favorable matchups up against every single Pokemon except for 2. Electrode and Lantern. Both of those can actually end up giving us quite a bit of trouble. Lantern just has an insane amount of bulk, and unless we can basically kill it with an Earthquake, we don't actually have too much to go at that Lantern, so we end up having some issues. The Raikou, though, is a tie, which is interesting. Raikou actually having access to something like Shadow Ball really did help its neutral damage in a lot of situations, so Raikou actually falls as a tie, but other than that, we have a pretty good matchup up against most of the electrics. Now let's actually switch over to what we should actually bring to the table to actually combat the Quagsire here. So grass is first on the list, so let's actually hit grass here. Yeah, straight off the bat you can see Celebi is the only one that we actually end up having a favorable matchup for, and if we want to look into that, you can actually see that Celebi actually doesn't have a grass type fast move. We have Charge Beam or Confusion, so that puts Celebi really far behind. And even then, in the charge move section, it doesn't have any grass type moves. Dazzling Gleam, Hyper Beam, and Psychic are all it's got. So unfortunately, it does carry that grass typing, but it doesn't actually do anything as a grass attacker. So we end up having a favorable matchup up against Celebi, but as you can see, everything else is pretty abysmal. I mean, a battle rating of only 84 up against Sunflora, that says a lot. Now let's actually look through these water types. So I have written down that beats things with Earthquake. So what I'm talking about there are the things that end up actually not liking to have to tank an Earthquake here. Like Tentacruel, having that ground type weakness because of its poison typing. Kabuto, having that rock type, ends up having a pretty bad time with the ground type moves. So you can kind of see some of these things just kind of end up being weak to Earthquake, which kind of gives us an edge in some of the matchups. But once you get past that, there's a couple of ties like Golduck, Lapras, Poliwhirl, and Quagsire, and then it just starts to go downhill from there. Slowbro, Wartortle, Vaporeon, Slowpoke, you can kind of see. Our worst possible matchup is the Cloyster, and then Suicune. I guarantee it's using Hidden Power. Yep, Grass again, so we don't need to look too deep into that, but you kind of know, based on the previous segment, that Suicune can actually beat us with Extrasensory and Snarl as well, depending on our moveset. Starmie, I'm sure, is using Hidden Power Grass as well. Dugong, Blastoise, Politoed, Feraligatr. You can kind of see that we don't have a great set of matchups up against the water, but we can actually beat a couple of them. So it's kind of not really like cut and dry as something like the fire type or the electric type, but it is kind of like worse in our situation. Now if we actually look at the bug type Pokemon here, you can kind of see we have a couple of good matchups here at the top, but then it really starts to fade away. So some basic Pokemon, Fortress of course isn't, he's a stage 1, but Butterfree, not really like super stat driven, so kind of doesn't have a whole lot of place here. But then we tie against the Ladian, and then it's all downhill. So Heracross, Beedrill, Scizor, Ariados, Pinsir, Venomoth, Scyther, and Parasect all end up giving us a run for our money. I'm glad my bug types come out on top. I can't lie. So in our last segment here, let's actually go over some pros and some cons for Quagsire. And this one's pretty interesting because really our only con is that we're carrying a big weakness to grass. But that's really it. I mean, you have two really versatile moves here, and then you have a just giant toolkit to really work with on how you want to build your Quagsire. So it just kind of depends on which direction you want to go with it. Being said our only downside is a weakness to grass, that's actually a pretty good con. I mean, that's not that bad of a con. It's not anywhere near saying Quagsire is unplayable. Quagsire, I definitely think that Quagsire has a huge toolkit. He has a lot of different versatility, and he lets you play some mind games like crazy. Being able to have Acid Spray and like just ditching some of this defense off of your opponent could be such a huge move for you. Like, it allows you to win certain matchups, not with Quagsire, but the Pokemon afterwards. So let's say that you're going up against one of these water types. Let's say you're going up against, I don't know, Blastoise. And Blastoise isn't a very favorable matchup for us, but we have something in the back that's kind of like even with Blastoise, maybe like Wartortle, or even maybe a fire type that's at least got neutral damage to Blastoise. Once you like chuck away a little bit of its defense, it allows that second matchup to go so much smoother for you. There's a lot of situations that happen like that. I definitely think that Quagsire, if you build him with Acid Spray, is more of a setup and like knock the dominoes down type Pokemon. He can knock a lot of stuff out. As we saw with these numbers here, he has favorable matchups in several shield situations, but he's really a setup type Pokemon. He sets up the match and then lets the other Pokemon just tear it down. Especially in this opening situation, 71.7% of the time, you're going to have favorable matchups, which is huge. So, the ones that you don't have favorable matchups up against, you can at least set up for your next pick to have a really easy time. It's just so many like possibilities with Quagsire. I definitely think Quagsire is going to be a front runner in a lot of this meta. I definitely think that if you don't have a Quagsire, you should start looking for one immediately. Hopefully you do have one from past cups, but if not, Quagsire is going to be one to beat. That is actually going to be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thank you so much for watching. Remember that if you like to like videos, you can do that, but if you don't, you can be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in those comments below. And until our next video, I will catch you then.